And good morning. Buenos dias. Okay, I might actually be kind of on time, if not slightly early. And we appear to have audio. Okay, jumping into it. Today is October 11th, 2024. This is episode 140. Hello, Mo. Thank you for joining. Grab a cup. Buenas tardes. Bueno. Okay. Ask a question. What are you up to? What are you working on? What interesting quirk or bug, maybe? What project are you working on with Business Central or something else? Okay. The weekend was resuming the everlasting car stereo install. Finally got the last speaker in, which required disassembling the whole door, which some cars is not too bad. This car is a bit of a challenge. So got the old speaker out, got the new speaker in, and immediately after putting it in, I realized it's upside down. And it's very hard to tell, but I don't know if you can see my cursor. There's a little tiny triangle. That triangle needs to go on the bottom because the tweeter is tilted. So after putting it in, I had to take it out, turn it over 180 degrees, and then put it back in. And then I put everything together. And then I realized that little tiny triangle is actually a button. It's a gain boost on the tweeter. So I then had to disassemble the entire car all over again to turn that button off to remove the plus 3 dB gain on the tweeter. So that was fun. So that was removing the rear panel to get at that speaker to turn that setting off. But it is now all the speakers are in, and I finally figured out the receiver. Just this massive wires and controllers. No soldering, thankfully, but it was a bit of a mess. But after staring at it for about 20 minutes, finally figured it out and miraculously got it installed and working. So next up is a backup camera. I even figured out how to run the wire for the cell phone or the telephone microphone, which comes with it. So went very pro there. So that was my weekend. It was absolutely exhausting. You wouldn't think installing a car stereo is a big deal, but man, every time I do it, I'm just like sweating and exhausted from digging under the dash, running wires, stuff like that for some reason. I don't know how people do it for a living. Anyway, weekly projects, catching our breath, following a go live last week. Moderately stressful, big project, but it's going fairly well. Customer is live. We're just doing a little bit of housekeeping and cleanup and refinements and catching up on some stuff that we didn't have time to do in prior to go live. We have a few report layouts for that customer and a couple others. And so I am now managing that with the ERP Center of Excellence interns. They're learning how to do different report layouts. And we're catching up on a few PTEs that we had to defer until go live. So we have some small ones that we're doing now. And it is frustrating on the small PTEs, the overhead involved just to do things properly. First, before you even get to the project, you've got your design, you've got your requirements, you've got your statement of work, you've got your estimate, then you have to create the project, you have to set up the pipelines, you have to get your repo, then you have to write the code, and then you've got testing and document. It's just like, it's unfortunate that a 4-hour PTE, like you pretty much have 6 to 8 hours of overhead if you account for everything, if you do it. Now, you may not need all of that, but it's a little frustrating that we can't just do a 4-hour PTE and like just write the code and bang it out. But I don't know how to deal with the overhead. If anyone has any magic solutions, I am all ears. We are using Cosmo Alpaca, which significantly cut the overhead of creating our project, our DevOps repo, our pipelines, our project structure, just all of that, greatly streamlined that down to roughly 1 hour, which is pretty impressive given all the work involved there. But we still have all the other administrative overhead, testing, documentation, and stuff. So I don't know how to, I don't think we can get rid of it, but yeah, open to suggestions. And Power Automate. Now that Ronald is starting as an intern, he's going to focus on Power Automate, learn about it, create some flows, learn about the connectors, the actions, the endpoints, the steps in a Power Automate flow. And yeah, it'll be interesting. And lessons of the week. What did I put here? So we've had a couple of checks in a row, and normally Tanya and Alyssa handle those check formats, but because we're having the ERP Center of Excellence, interns do check layouts or report layouts in general. I'm kind of managing their learning, their check layout formats, and we're looking at the Micker check specs. And it is wild. Like, we get this document, the bank says the check specs must be this. Then we look at their current check layout, and we're like, they're not the same. Like, maybe in the few key elements, the Micker line and the dollar amount are the same, but lots of elements on the check are just not compliant according to the specifications. So it's a little confusing, and the instruction we receive is make it look like the customer's existing check. It's like, wait a minute, then what's the point of the spec? It's very strange. And also, the specs are highly inconsistent from bank to bank. One bank is just, they only have 2 requirements. Micker check line must have this border, and the dollar amount must be in this, the word was like imaginary square or something like that. Whereas another bank has all sorts of other requirements that the customer apparently has not been following for the last X years, yet their checks get cashed. So a little interesting to see what matters and what doesn't matter with Micker check specs. And I initially had an issue with Power Automate this week, or I did have an issue with the Power Automate flow this week, but it turned out to technically not be Power Automate's fault. But I am leery. I'm not eager to set up Power Automate flows for critical business processes. I just do not trust it. I'm trying to learn how to, if it is possible, to make a Power Automate flow more robust to the point where it doesn't just fail without me knowing or without me understanding the cause and without taking a couple days to fix it. In some cases, yes, that is possible. In other cases, I have definitely seen it is not possible. And those situations have made me very leery for using Power Automate for business critical processes. Okay. So with that, Monday, Lunes. This was an interesting call. And the lesson, sorry, still have a little bit of a cold here. The lesson to discuss is The topic of outsourcing your critical business processes or customers' critical business processes to service providers. And we do this all the time. And it's like, oh, what's the big deal? Customers use Business Central. That is outsourcing a critical business process to Microsoft, right? Customers use, say, QuickBooks, or they use a 3PL for their inventory, their warehousing, their assembly, their logistics, their delivery. We use UPS, FedEx, US Postal Service, or other carriers to deliver packages. So it's a fact of life. You may have an e-commerce provider. Maybe you're using WooCommerce or WordPress or whatever else for e-commerce. And then banking, right? Like, we're not banks, so we are outsourcing the critical business process of cash management, banking account, payment delivery to banks. Credit card processing is another twist. So this is common. But what was interesting was a call I had with a customer, and they wanted information on how to work with this service provider. And the service provider is a public US company. We're public. We're a listed company. As far as I can tell, they have about $1.5 billion in revenue that they claim at this point in time. And they tout they have over 460,000 business customers, which you might think, wow, that's great. Sure, let's choose them. Perfectly safe bet. Until you get on a call with them, and then the person says, yeah, if you're working with Business Central, we recommend disabling MEM. And I said, what? And they said, yeah, we're not compatible with MEM, so you need to turn that off in Business Central to work with our product. And I said, what? This is a $1.5 billion company telling their customers to disable multi-entity management if they use it in Business Central. Really interesting statement. And this, I think this was an onboarding rep. It's like, okay, you can't do that. That's not how it works. Then we said, okay, well, since you don't support MEM, we would like to work with your API, since you have an API. Oh, yeah, well, I'll need to talk to someone else in a different department and have you talk to them because we're decreasing our support for our API. I don't know what that means, but I'm like, wait, what? You're decreasing your support for your API? Like, tell me more. Are you deprecating your API? Like, what's going on? How does a $1.5 billion company with 460,000 customers decrease support for their API? So I don't know what that statement meant. Maybe this person, that was just an off-the-cuff statement and they don't know what that means, but that was concerning. So after talking to this person, I went and looked up the financials of this company because I'm like, I'm smelling cost cutting, like something is strange here. Well, it turns out this company has been around for like 16 or 18 years. I don't know. It's been around for a while under a couple names. They have had operating losses for over 15 years. And as far as I can tell, I didn't look at all their financials. They have never made a profit, a net profit. Now, they claim they had a GAAP profit, which I don't know what that means. I have dug into it. But as far as I could tell, that was one quarter. They reported a profit based on GAAP guidelines. But as far as I can tell, their operating income has always been a loss. And I think they've had a net loss. So I don't know how they squeezed out a GAAP profit, maybe investment income or something like that. They're acquiring other companies. So I don't know how they're funding their operations, but they report as of 2024, latest quarter, they have $1.1 billion in accumulated deficit from their ongoing losses. Think about this. This is a company providing critical business processes to mid-market customers, and they integrate with ERP systems. No one is looking at this information, certainly not my customer who had the call. So this makes me a little concerned. Like, They've existed for over 15 years in this mode of operation. Their losses are growing as of the last 2 quarters. I don't understand. It's like defying gravity. How long can a company have losses like this? How long can a company have these deficits and survive? I do not know what or who is funding this. It's baffling. So, yeah. So, what's your choice? Turns out in this particular space, there are many, many competing service providers. So in this case, I know this customer could choose from a dozen different service providers. They won't be as big, they may not be public, but they may not have the same pricing structure. But I mean, who are you going to place your bet on? Now, this customer's been using this company for years, so I'm not going to tell them this and tell them to bail, but I'm a little concerned. So we're discussing this internally. It's like, okay, just heads up. And if you think such companies cannot disappear, well, this was a customer of mine many years ago called APX Logistics. They were a company that was apparently acquired by venture-backed VCs or some type of investment group. And then they acquired other firms, and they became very quickly a $750 million company. I was on site at this company almost every day for months. And then one day, you show up and the doors are literally locked because they overnight shut down. Went from $750 million claimed revenue to zero. And they were a logistics company that transported packages, had trucks all over the nation. Those trucks were parked in parking lots all over the country, just walked away. And over the several months, they tried to figure out how to recover these trucks, how to get the packages off of them, and how to deal with the fallout from this. And if you're familiar with more recent news, I think it was Yellow Trucking, the largest logistics company in the US, 30,000 some employees, just filed for bankruptcy. So massive companies, service providers for thousands of companies just disappear overnight. On the banking front, you may have heard of this small bank called Silicon Valley Bank. I've banked with them before many years ago, and many people bank with them, had millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in accounts with Silicon Valley Bank. Disappeared, went out of business, just bank run in 48 hours, gone. So think about these things. Yeah. On a more positive note, tech stuff. So I use Lenovo ThinkPads, and if you are familiar with ThinkPads, you'll recognize the power supply at the top there. That is their smaller 65-watt power supply that powers many of their kind of typical laptops. It is USB-C, and I've used it for years without questioning it, without thinking of it. It is kind of bulky and cumbersome, and you got to type the cords, but it works, and I've never had an issue, never had one fail, never had a problem with any of the power supplies, and I've had, I think, 19, 20 of them by now. And yeah, but then I was just, I was aware of these. I just never really thought of them for this purpose. And I looked at this Anchor. This is a USB-C 65-watt power supply, and it is a small cube. I don't have it handy right now, but it's a small cube, inch and a half. And you just use a USB-C cable rated appropriately for the wattage. In this case, they do have a 60-watt Anchor cable. I got the 100-watt just to have plenty of headroom. And you use this 100-watt USB-C cable, and this cable is a 10-foot cable, so plenty long. That's not an issue. So I'm like, should I just use this instead of the big, bulky 65-watt ThinkPad power supply? So I'm going to give it a try. And I need backup power supplies in El Salvador because if one of those things goes down, the laptop is useless. So I've bought several of these as backups to bring to El Salvador, and they can use them in their travel bag. But let me know, do you use the standard default power supply? Do you ever replace a bulky laptop power supply with the smaller USB-C? And I know Macs have, for quite a while now, come with a much more compact power supply. Over the years, pros and cons depending on the design. And now, like Anker makes 100, 120 watt, some big beefy, I think they're called GAN, GAN power supplies. So do you use your default factory power supply with your laptop, or do you find one of these compact travel power supplies and use them? I'm kind of curious how they work out for you. Pros and cons, like, is it harder to get behind a cabinet at a hotel and plug this thing in? And is that a hassle? Whereas, say, the Lenovo one with the cord is a little easier? Not sure. About to find out. And so it seems El Salvador is hard on laptops. I'm not quite sure what it is. Temperature, I suspect moisture plays a role, but one of the Battle Tank T470, I think, laptops that I brought a year ago, it has a keyboard that is failing. So the keyboard just goes haywire and characters go crazy. So I looked online, and $27.50, I was able to order a ThinkPad replacement keyboard off of eBay. Looked up a few videos, and it takes 3 minutes to replace this thing. 2 screws are in the back of the laptop. You pop out the keyboard, you replace it, and you're good to go. And this is like a video somewhere in Africa. He's in just a shack somewhere. He's got a screwdriver, pops it out, pops it back in. He's good to go. The T470 is back up and running. I'm like, perfect. That's exactly what I need. So that is one of the many reasons why I have chosen ThinkPad. Dell Latitude is apparently very similar, but these things have to be maintainable. They have to be robust and tough. Hello, Christian. Good afternoon. Guten Tag. So that was my tech stuff that I worked on. And while shopping for that Anker power supply, Amazon had a discount. I didn't really realize what it was for, but it was like $6 off. It was like, oh, okay, $26 for that power supply makes it cheaper, more or less, with the USB-C cable, about the same or cheaper than buying an authentic Lenovo charger. So it's very appealing. Well, it turns out that was a special. So there it is, the Nano 265 watt. I noticed the price went up to $32.99. I thought, huh. Well, a friend years ago told me about this website and browser plugin called Camelizer, and it allows you to track prices of items on Amazon. Not all items, but many of the common items. And it shows you whether Amazon stocked it and what its price was, third-party new, third-party used. And really handy plugin, and it shows you the price range over time in that chart. So I put in a new price alert for $30. So if it drops below $30, back down to $27 or whatever, I'll get an email letting me know when I can buy it on sale. So pretty handy plugin. No idea what the privacy implications are, but as far as I can tell, you just need an email. So I have my anonymous email through Simple Login. And so that's what I used. It's an email alias. And I don't even think you need the browser plugin. You can use their website if you want, camel.com. So very handy tool if you use Amazon and want to get notifications for discounts. On Tuesday, martes, we were trying to work on a custom Business Central web API dealing with notes. And my developer got this error, 400 invalid format of GUID string. And I have seen this before. I encountered it I actually have a blog post on it. I encountered it. I didn't know what the solution was. I later on saw someone on Twitter post an issue with the same error. They couldn't figure it out. And then we encountered that last week or this week. And in this case, I spoke with my developer yesterday. Turns out that the issue he found is when he attempted to pass the GUID, it was a system ID, I believe, system ID GUID. When he attempted to pass that as a GUID data type, this is the error he got. And no matter what he did, he couldn't get it to work. He just gave up and said, fine, let me try to pass it as a text value or a string. And it worked. So whatever is happening in somewhere in the validation of these parameters, even though the parameter data type says GUID, that's what he did, it doesn't work. And he had to pass it as text. Now, I didn't look at the code, so I don't know the exact details, but this is the third time I've seen this. So not sure what's going on. Maybe someday in my abundant free time, we'll dig into it and figure it out. But very strange. And I'm not the only one to encounter this. So I've encountered it. Someone on Twitter encountered it. And now our developer ran into it. So very interesting. If you're familiar with this error, let me know. Love to know what the solution is or why it's occurring. And then on the Power Automate front, I mentioned that I'm a little leery of Power Automate due to reliability concerns. Just stuff breaks. And the primary issue seems to be not Power Automate overall, but Power Automate relies upon connectors. And connectors are what makes Power Automate valuable. You have thousands of these connectors that connect to all sorts of things. You have Salesforce, you have Business Central, you have Microsoft Forms, you have Microsoft Office, you have email, all these third-party apps. Very cool. But one day, out of the blue, a connector just stops working. And you will not necessarily get an email or notification right away. You won't know that your Power Automate flow stopped working. Sometimes I get emails within an hour saying this flow failed. Sometimes I get an email 3 days later saying, hey, this flow failed 3 days ago. I'm like, come on, man. So I don't know why. It's just not, I get zero confidence of reliability. And the horror stories I've read of people who have built these massive Power Automate flows for critical business operations, they go live, and then one of the connectors stops working for 3 weeks because a deployment went out, they broke this connector. The author of the connector has no power to fix it because it's not, their connector's fine. Something in the Power Automate or whatever Power Platform universe broke. It's not pretty. So, and you have no ability to fix it. You have no power to resolve this. Just the connector is dead. In this case, this failure, it turns out, was due to the connection to send an email. The rest of the flow worked properly, but the email notification portion failed. And the error message is connection not found. Like, what? This has been working for weeks. Connection not found. I didn't touch it. Please create a new connection and change your application to use the new connection. Like, why? Well, I go in, look at my connections, like connection broken, whatever, and I say reconnect. It's like, great, I've reconnected. All good. Okay, I save it. I close out the Power Automate. I'm like, okay, Power Automate, definitely not reliable. Can't even send an email. 2 days later, I go and check. No notification. Failed again. Like, what is going on? I just fixed this. I look again, try to reconnect this mail connector. This time it tells me promptly, failed. Wouldn't reconnect. Like, what is going on? I research it. It turns out that something happened. Microsoft revoked my Office 365 license on my account. And I had to go into 365 admin, look at my user. I no longer had an Office 365 license. I'm like, what? No idea. So I had to reassign an Office 365 license to my own user account. And it says, you don't have a mailbox. I'm like, great. So I was getting errors for hours. It took several hours for it to recreate my mailbox. It restored everything, but my mailbox was gone. My account had no Office license. So technically, it wasn't Power Automate's fault, but the connector broke due to this just bizarre issue with Office 365 license being revoked for my user. I'm like, it happens, but this was just a warning sign like, okay, the effort required to figure out what went wrong was a little too high for my comfort level. So this was not fully Power Automate's fault, but this is the type of thing that I'm like, okay, how do we make this more robust? I'd love to use Power Automate. When you create a flow and it just works, you're like, that is magic. But the downside is you have no control over the operations, the mechanics, the plumbing behind the scenes. And yeah, so I'd love to make it more robust. And that's one of the things that I'm going to task Ronald with. When these flows fail, how do you do try, catch, retry, whatever the operation is, to have something monitoring this to let you know immediately what the problem was and how do you more efficiently look into it. Christian asks, which user did you use to authenticate using the connector, real user S2S? I'm assuming he's referring to OAuth. In this case, this was Outlook. So this was an Outlook failure. And Business Central has its own, connector issues. And I have read accounts where the Business Central connector breaks, nothing the Business Central team can do. It was an update on the Power Platform. Something broke the connectors, all connectors to Business Central in the back end somewhere. And everyone just had to wait a couple days until it got fixed. So it happens. And it's not just Business Central, it's all the connectors potentially have this issue. So it's just like a minefield. Okay. BC Learning API posting. This one was fascinating. Let me know if you've heard this story. I was not aware of any of this. I hadn't really thought about it because I don't know if this is a common use case, but we have a couple customers where an ISV or a third party is importing transactions and posting. Oh, Christian asked, any recommendations which user to use for a connector to BC? In my humble opinion, S2S, because like no logins, you have a secret, you apply it, and in theory, you're not having to redo that. I know that AJ has a different opinion, but security-wise, you should be using something different in theory, but practically everyone that I have worked with, any third party is always using S2S. And it is the client secret, client ID, like I'm not aware of any other third party that I've integrated via API that's using anything other than API keys and secrets, including the $1.5 billion company with 460,000 customers. It's just API key. And another company we just integrated with, major service provider for our customer, API key and secret. So I am not seeing a reason to bend over backwards to use some elaborate authentication mechanism with APIs. I do understand the arguments for different methods for security, but I don't believe the threat model supports it. Okay, so moving on to API posting, I had no idea about this. So I'll try to explain this, try to follow me here. Okay. If you have set up S2S authentication for Business Central API access and you've created your Entra published application and you have granted, grant access or admin auth or whatever it's called, one of the last steps you need to do is go into Business Central, into the page formerly known as Azure Active Directory Published App or whatever it's called. Now it's called Microsoft Entra Applications, and you need to register your application with Business Central and put in the client ID and give it a name. I use this example, Postman API. When you do that, you will notice a dialog which you'll just quickly overlook and dismiss and click yes and say, fine, let's go forward. A user named Postman API, what I called it, will be created. Do you want to continue? What is going on here? I didn't know. I never paid attention to this. I've only done this a few times, so it's like, whatever. Okay. If you click yes, something happens, but what? If you go to the users page in Business Central, what do you see? You do not see a Business Central user called Postman API. You only see Business Central users. What is going on here? Turns out, behind the scenes, Business Central creates an application user record in the users table. You have to go to the table information, pull up the records, and you will see a new Postman API user that says type application, whereas the other BC users are something like full access or something like that. So what happens when this API user called Postman API calls a bound action on your API endpoint to post a batch? Well, predictably, it posts the batch. But what's important about posting? What is a critical element of posting that all accountants, all controllers, all CFOs care about with regard to posting? It's one of the first things I taught the interns for the ERP Center of Excellence in Berlin, El Salvador. What do accounting nerds care about when it comes to posting transactions? Well, they care about the posting date, right? And not only is the posting date critical, because that determines which fiscal period the transaction gets classified in, but they also care about restricting posting dates, right? Because you don't want someone to accidentally post to 2023 or 2025 or January or December. You want them to post when it's October. We have October open. We want to post to that fiscal period. Well, what happens when an API posts a batch outside of the allowed period specified in general ledger setup? The batch posts. When an API calls a bound action to post a batch, it can post to any fiscal period, to any date. It is not restricted by the general ledger setup, allow posting from, or allow posting to date range. We've now encountered this at 2 customers. Guess what? You may say, oh, well, but so we looked at this and said, that is interesting. I'm like, okay, so that's what it's doing. How do we prevent that? So I had a call with Alyssa and I said, okay, let's try user setup. Well, guess what? Remember how I said that the API user is not listed as a BC user because it's an application record? You can't add the user here under user setup to try and restrict the date range at the user level. So I said, Alyssa, try typing the name of the API user in. Guess what? You have to know the name of the user that was created for your Entra application, which is not hard to do. And you can also go to the user table to look it up, but we didn't know this. Your average application consultant is not going to know this. You have to know this. You have to manually type it in. And then you hit tab. You'll have no indication you're doing this right till you hit tab and it validates. And then you have to specify the posting date range at the user level in order to restrict an API to prevent it from posting to any date that is imported for these batches. Crazy. That was the lesson of the week. APIs using bound actions are not restricted at all to any posting limitation in terms of dates. Folks, be on your A game because this is what it requires, like reverse engineering the zaniness. So that is a pretty significant oversight of the Business Central API. I am a little puzzled by this because you would think that the API is using a common code unit to post, but apparently not. Apparently there's a higher layer of validation that's occurring at the user level for a full user that checks posting dates. And the API is posting at a lower level that does not include posting date restrictions. Cheers. Welcome. And with that, lovely. Ted says, I hope you reported it. I welcome someone else to report it. Unfortunately, I'm a bit jaded and I don't bother anymore. Maybe we could have a bounty where someone reports this for me because I have neither the time, the energy, or the patience to deal with this. So I welcome someone else to report it. Yeah. So there's your bug. Report it. Easily reproducible, and knock yourselves out. So maybe I'll send someone coffee if they report it and it gets included in a hotfix. How's that? So there's some El Salvador artisanal coffee on the line for someone who has the patience and the diligence to report it and get it submitted as a bug. Okay, Wednesday, miércoles. We did, yeah, get AJ to do it. Yeah, I'm sure AJ is jaded as well. But Wednesday, miércoles, binary stream. We did an internal training session on binary stream, primarily for the ERP Center of Excellence interns, but also for myself because I just haven't gone through the configuration of that. So Alyssa gave us a training on that, covered the highlights, and we covered the configuration, basically how to use it, primarily dimension one, what are the main configuration options, user setup, things like that. And we are starting to work on more binary stream report layouts. We're doing a check, we're doing a sales invoice. And strangely, some customers use binary stream, but they don't use the binary stream reports or the MEM reports. They use standard BC reports. Other customers do use the MEM reports. It's a little confusing to me. So we're kind of learning that. And binary stream, what was I going to say? Oh, roughly, we're guesstimating. I'd love to have better numbers, but we're guessing roughly 40% of our customers, Business Central customers, use binary stream, MEM. So we are preparing for it. We're getting trained for it. We're bringing the interns up to speed so they're familiar with it because it's so commonly used, at least in the United States. Franchises, property management seem to be common use cases of multi-entity management. And coming from the GP world, we have customers with 10 companies or entities. We have customers with 90. And I've worked with customers with over 700 entities in Dynamics GP. And so we need to prepare for that in Business Central. And if you work with companies with more than 100 entities, be aware that it appears to be a licensing limitation in multi-entity management. Below 100 entities, you have one license. Above 100 entities, you need a different licensing scheme. So just be aware of that when you get your quote. And I had a call with Ronald in Berlin to review Power Automate. He's diving in head first, and we worked on one of our internal flows, the one that failed recently. We were migrating it from my personal Office 365 tenant over to our Blue Dragonfly tenant to just get it out of my hair, get it set up properly. So we had to get him a premium, I think that is what it's called, a Power Automate premium license so he could work with the premium connectors and recreate that. And yeah, appears to be working. We need to improve reliability though. And then Wednesday night, speaking of outsourcing to service providers, Asana, which my developer and I have used for years, it was down. So on our review call, we were unable to access Asana. We were unable to review tasks. We kind of knew what we needed to do, and we had the email notifications, which lists the contents of the task. So that was a good backup, but it was only down for an hour or two, I think. But that was quite a coincidence that I'm talking about service providers and we had that outage. Very unusual error message as well. Never seen that before. Okay. Next week, Tuesday, October 15th. So on Sunday, I'm flying to San Antonio, Texas. I will be there Sunday through Thursday. I will be at the Summit NA conference presenting with Silview. So see you there. Come and say hi. I'll be roaming around. Don't know where I'll be or what I'll be doing. But on Tuesday, October 15th, 8 p.m., I will be at 1902 on Commerce Street. No idea where that is, but it is in San Antonio, Texas. Make sure to register here to register on the whatever website that is. It's not Meetup. Anyway, scan the QR code and you'll see where it goes. Make sure to sign up to register for the event. I think we have several hundred people already registered. Sponsored by a BC consulting group and Blue Dragonfly Test Team, Business Central Toolbox, NetStock, Cosmos, and Notice. So come enjoy the first annual BC Bash in San Antonio, Texas. And next up, interesting cybersecurity twist. Who knew? BC cybersecurity, kind of. So Chris Blank has a great blog post. I had to read it 3 times to understand what was going on here. But on the 3rd time, it clicked and dawned on me, and I understood what was going on. I was like, aha. I would call this similar to sideloading. So there is a concept called DLL sideloading attack, where you just drop a DLL into a directory like Microsoft Teams. It does not validate the DLL, and it dutifully loads the malicious DLL on your behalf, and you can then fully take over a machine by kind of bypassing the antivirus restrictions because it's not an EXE, so it's a little harder to scan the contents, I'm guessing, of DLLs. Well, Chris has a great write-up showing how you can effectively excuse me. You can write a malicious extension that masquerades as an authorized extension, is loaded by an app source app because the only validation that's occurring is the app ID from what I could tell. So you're essentially masquerading as another library app or dependency. It dutifully loads your app as a library app or a dependency. And your app then has keys to the kingdom to call internal methods such as get password from protected storage. Really clever. I'm apparently this was a known threat model. This is no secret, but he just demonstrates how it's done. So really clever, great write-up. Yeah. The only thing protecting isolated storage in this scenario that he outlines is the app ID. And so do not ignore the warning that he points out. This is app source cop warning AS0081. Internals visible to should not be used as a security feature. So he was working with a partner in app source app, and he discovered this, and he was able to demonstrate how to sideload his malicious PTE in order to read from protected storage. Great article. Go check it out, chris-blank.de, or use the handy dandy QR code. Okay, moving on to Thursday, Jueves. The Business Central Bank deposit. And those of you who like to report bugs, here you go. We're not entirely sure because these things are kind of inconsistent and hard to document and submit, but our customer has been using the BC Bank deposit page in order to record payments, and they use the apply entries page. And when they are applying multiple payments from the same customer, we are seeing some very, very bizarre behavior. So they'll apply payment 1, everything looks good. Then they run the posting. It's not even called a posting report. Also very strange, very inconsistent bank deposit. It's like the posting testing report or something. The numbers sometimes will look good. Sometimes the numbers on the posting report will change. It's like bizarre. They put 700. The posting report says 725. And you're like, what? Then you close the posting report. You go back to the apply entries page. The numbers have literally changed on your apply record. Like it just reverts and wipes out what you typed. Then you'll do a second apply, second payment, you'll apply it. You'll run the post-testing report. The numbers will just be fictional. Like you applied $800, it'll say $455.32. Not only that, the applies to ID will be wrong. It'll just be completely incorrect documents in the apply data. And they encountered this once. They thought it was a fluke because they had posted the application and realized things were wrong. They had to undo it. Now we're seeing it verifiably in the applies window. So if anyone else has seen issues on the bank deposit apply entries page, hit me up and let me know if this is a bug. We're having to disable all our P2Es just to rule out them as a possible weird conflict. But yeah, very, very strange behavior there. And I am creating an application user guide for our new AppSource app that we just published for our last customer. So that's exciting. Not really, not my favorite task, but finally getting that done, creating that documentation. So that's what I did yesterday. And today, of course, we have the live stream. Cheers. And I have a call momentarily with the ERP Center of Excellence team in Berlin. We now have 3 full-time interns, one candidate doing BCAL dev training. He's just getting started. And then we have another person starting next week with BC training. So it is a busy time. And speaking of which, excellence update. I mentioned Power Automate Learning, so that is well underway. So we're going to put Ronald to work learning about Power Automate, give him some work to do. And you will notice that we now have fans. You can only see one in this photo in the far left corner there. I went with the fancy fans. These are the wall-mounted fans with a remote, and because it gets kind of warm and humid everywhere in El Salvador, but the fans really help. So we now have 2 fans in the Career Center, and Jocelyn, as you can see, has decorated it in full Halloween decor. So we have spiders and webs and lanterns and you name it. So yes, we are decorated for Halloween. And also I received a shipment of 4 new Greetings, Eric. I got a shipment of 4 new used ThinkPads off of eBay. 4 great condition ThinkPads for $1,000. And pretty incredible. So I have 2 Gen 7 X1 carbons and 2 Gen 1 T14s. And so by dropping down a generation or 2, I went from $550 per laptop to $250 on these each. And they're basically 1 or 2 years older. So these are roughly 4 years old from release, but they work perfectly fine. They are not in warranty, but that's fine. At $250, a warranty literally costs more than the cost of the laptop. So as long as they hold on for a couple of years, well worth the cost. And if it's a battery, a keyboard, a display, anything, it's replaceable pretty easily. The system board is about the only thing that's expensive. A new one of those can run for a 2-year-old model, roughly $1,000. So not worth replacing. You just buy a laptop and you use that for parts. So that's what I've got going. So I've got to get those tested this weekend. And yeah, so I'll be carting those to El Salvador in November. And we will have laptops for 4 more people. So, questions? Anyone have questions? What are you working on? What is the latest BC bug that you have encountered? And yeah, so I have some questions. How do you manage your team? A lot of feedback, universal feedback I've received from partners in the US is that they refuse to have remote team members, which that's what they say, right? Those are the words that come out of their mouth or that they tell me. But they all have remote team members, and they don't seem to recognize the contradiction in what they're saying. And my impression is that partners are unwilling to accept new remote team members, I speculate, because they do not have great management practices for their team members, is my assumption. They have tried to use, the most common one is offshoring to India, right? Many of us have horror stories of that. And they relied upon a firm in India to handle the management for them. And I think that goes south very quickly. So how do you manage your team? How do you, or if you're a manager and you work with your team, what tools do you use? What practices do you use? Because it doesn't just magically happen. Um, Eric says eFocus is 100% remote. We don't have an office anymore, just a mailbox. Exactly. We have someone in Utah. We have someone in, I don't even know where she's at, somewhere in the Midwest, Missouri. I don't even know. We have someone who's now in Mexico. We have a team in El Salvador. We have a corporation in India. So we are literally all over the world. And Eric says, we start every morning with a company-wide Teams call. Everyone speaks their day. Then we live on Teams all day. I think that pretty much we're very similar. Now, follow-up question is, how do you manage your projects and tasks? So that's kind of a second challenge is I cannot remember what anyone is doing. I cannot remember the next day. What I was supposed to work on or what so-and-so was supposed to work on. Eric says, we don't care where people are located, but company hours are Pacific. Makes sense. Now, I have a twist on the company hours that I'll share. Christian says, we're hybrid. I'm aware that I have to actively connect via Teams and keep up good connections. Yep. So I see lots of organizations moving remotely. We're certainly doing it, and we have practices in place to work with that. We accept some of the compromises. So the people who work in other countries, they have different holidays than us. So our developer in India is like, hey, this is, they don't call it, they call it not holiday, not festival. I forget the word for all the Indian holidays, but it's the Indian holiday season. And it's like, hey, I'm going to take a couple days off. I'm like, cool, right? El Salvador is the same. They have some different holidays. Mother's Day and Father's Day apparently are national holidays in El Salvador, which they're not in the US. So we have to adapt, right? And so we need explicit practices. We need to constantly work those practices to manage our remote team. And we need tools to manage projects and tasks so that everyone is on the same page. We need communication through calls, like what Eric was saying. Christian says, use a good project management tool. We are elaborating on A-work at the moment. Yeah, so I would say Notepad is perfectly fine. If that's your standard, great. We currently use Asana, as I've mentioned. I personally have daily calls or communication at 6:30, 8:30, 2:30, and 6:30 again. So I roughly have 12 hours of comms throughout the day that I maintain, and sometimes I go until 8 p.m. on those calls. But I'm not chained to my desk throughout the day, so it's kind of a trade-off, right? So I have a 12-hour window that I'm communicating with our team in order to check on things first thing in the morning, check on new releases, pipelines that ran overnight. We then get things to customers by 7 a.m. or earlier. I then have calls with Berlin, El Salvador, 8:30 a.m. my time, 9:30 theirs. Then I have an afternoon call with El Salvador. Then I have the 6:30 p.m. call with India. And we have this rotating cycle. So that's what we have come up with. But constant calls daily with El Salvador, for sure. And then interesting side effect of being distributed around the world is that we are looking into a 24-hour development cycle. And that's not quite as ominous as it sounds. It just turns out that India can operate overnight. And we can have that call at 6:30, talk about what happens that day in India. Does the work. I go to bed. I wake up 6:30. Hey, how did it go? Did we have any issues? Did the pipelines run? Do we have a new release? Boom. That goes to our consultants by 7 a.m. Pacific time, goes to our customers, gets installed. They test throughout the day. We get feedback, and it goes for an overnight dev cycle again. Now, we are also working with having development resources in El Salvador that will handle US time zone during the day. So, as we build out that skill set, we will then have US daytime cycle for development and a nighttime cycle. So, we're experimenting, see if that's a possibility. Not that we want to work 24 hours, but if we need something fixed overnight, we now can. If we need something fixed during the day, we want the ability to do that. Christian says his company is hybrid. He's aware that I already covered that one. Christian says use a good project management tool. And Eric says, I have built a task project system based on the BC project module with a nice web front end. So find a tool that works for your organization. I don't recommend evangelizing any tool. Find a tool that works. My developer has used Asana for years, so that's what we adopted. I call it my glorified to-do list because we only use the simplest features. We have projects, we have tasks, we have categories, works for us, works great on mobile phones. It's free for us at the moment. Nice side benefit. We do not need Miro. We do not need Notion. I do not need something that has 27 palettes and infinite canvas and elaborate UI, UX design capabilities. I need a to-do list, right? If you want to do mind mapping in Xmind, knock yourself out for your task. But when everyone needs to get together, we need a very low common denominator that we can all use. So that's what we've used on my side for the dev team and the El Salvador team. Super simple and it works for us. But I would say find the simplest tool that works for you. Anyway, so Christian says, how do you handle well-defined requirements for your setting when direct communication is asynchronous? We usually, when we need detailed requirements discussions, we need to have a call. Really hard to do that just remotely via email, I've found. So we have a call and we talk about the details. We have to write it out. I mock it up. PowerPoint is my Miro or my Notion. I don't use any of the fancy tools. I literally sketch it up in PowerPoint, Excel, Word, whatever, because those are the tools we have. And I do a mock-up. I do a flow diagram in PowerPoint, save that PowerPoint, paste it into Asana. Developers like, cool, I got you. Fortunately, we've worked together long enough for many years now that we kind of operate on the same wavelength. And that is also a challenge of working with new people remotely. Sometimes you say something and they have a completely different interpretation. So you need to work together long enough to start to get on the same page. So it can be challenging. Eric says, I need a system that ensures that work gets invoiced. Absolutely. That is the holy grail. I just told Tanya this week, I need an elf on my shoulder whose sole purpose is, instead of elf on a shelf, elf on my shoulder, it just records my time for me, right? Like, I hate it. We all hate it. Timesheets, time tracking, submitting billable time, doing the invoices. If you're using project accounting or whatever they call it these days in Business Central, getting that into projects, getting it invoiced, making sure it's accurate, the right project, the right task, the right date, the description. My understanding is the descriptions don't reliably flow over to invoices in Business Central. So that's an internal PTE that Tanya's been asking for. Big challenge. So I am constantly telling our developer and the El Salvador team, the interns, you got to record your time and bill for it. That's the only way we make money, right? Pay for these salaries. Ted says, well-defined requirements. Good luck with that, right? That's a can of worms. Are any requirements ever well-defined? You think they are until you get 80% of the way through the project and you're like, we didn't cover that. What does this statement mean in the statement of work? I have no idea, right? It's happened to me. Ted says, you want Steve to go for another hour? Exactly. So Eric says, that's why I built a custom system for tasks. Billing needs to be a core feature of it. Yeah. And we looked at, in a similar vein, we looked at Azure DevOps and GitHub, how you can have your tasks in your DevOps solution that flow into pull requests or, when you're fixing bugs and that flows all the way through your DevOps system. But I'm like, nope, not going to happen. Try to use Azure DevOps for a week. It's like, no way, come on. And it doesn't integrate with other things. It's not as accessible. So for us, it's just not a feature. So anyway, yeah, we're doing constant calls, daily calls, twice a day with the Berlin team. I do 3 times a week with our developer in India, just because I've worked with him so long. We ping each other on Teams and emails, so we have no problems there. And then we just have intermittent calls with the consulting team to make sure we're on the same page. Christian says he prefers A-Work because it has task management, capacity, time recording in one system, and they're going to build a BC connector. So you got to choose something that's accessible, works for you, works for your team. Whatever your team uses is better than the fanciest system in the world with all sorts of very cool features. And it's that meme where the guy's walking with his girlfriend and he looks over his shoulder at the other woman. There's always that tool that looks fancy or more familiar, but if no one is using it, or if not everyone is using it, it doesn't matter how fancy it is. So with that, thanks for watching. Thanks for coming on. Have a sip. And if someone does submit that API bug that allows an API to post outside of the restricted posting range in GL setup, let me know. I will send you fresh coffee from El Salvador, from Good Beans El Salvador. Gabe will package that up, ship that via DHL to your doorstep internationally. So let me know. Hit me up on Twitter, email me, whatever. Eric says, my experience with the multi-time zone setup is that it doesn't work well. The overhead of communicating requirements to people who don't have work hour overlap is way too expensive. I can understand that perspective. Definitely. We are willing and able to make it work in our case. So we do well between, how do I get rid of this? We do well between my time zone, Pacific time zone, and India time zone. So we have 6:30 check-in in the morning. I have 6:30 p.m. Check-in and project review at night. And that allows us to have a full 12-hour cycle, nighttime cycle from US perspective to prepare a new release. So during our go live, we had many overnight cycles. Dev, we release at 7 a.m. East Coast customer tests by 10 a.m. They give us feedback, and then it returns to the overnight cycle. Cosmo Alpaca was great for our build pipelines. I got the notification. We have a Power Automate flow that takes our build artifact from our release pipeline, grabs it from Azure Storage, Blob Storage, drops it into SharePoint, sends me an email notification, sends it to our entire team. So we have worked on automating that process to make it as seamless as possible, reduce our communication costs, reduce our build costs, our release and deployment costs. We're always working on improving it, but for now, it's pretty impressive as far as I'm concerned. It's the best I've ever had by far. So now that we're bringing someone online, working to bring some people online in El Salvador, we're hoping to have them focus on PTEs with our India development being app source oriented for a little less time sensitive things. But yeah, we're experimenting. It's one big grand experiment. And to think that our team could have a 24-hour dev cycle is pretty wild, but it's been going pretty good so far. And Ted says it is good coffee. I totally agree. This is the Toragos House Roast from Good Beans El Salvador. So if someone does submit the API posting date range bug, let me know. Coffee is waiting for you. Okay, cheers. Thanks for coming. Adios. Nos vemos.